The name of the story, Rust and Roses. Chapter 1, Sparks in the Dust. The desert had a way of chewing things up and spitting them out. Cars, people, dreams, it didn't discriminate. Rosie learned that young, growing up in a sunburnt Nevada town where the only real rhythm was the clank of tools in her father's garage and the endless hum of cicadas outside. By 28, she'd inherited the place, grease-stained overalls and all. It wasn't glamorous, and she didn't pretend it was. She worked long hours, ate sandwiches with oil-smudged hands, and ended most days with her hair smelling faintly of gasoline. She liked it that way, which is why she had no patience for the shiny red sports car limping in her lot one Tuesday afternoon, dust caked to the bumper, engine hissing like a dying snake. The driver climbed out slowly, leaning on crutches, sunglasses masking half his face. His hair was too styled for this town, his jacket far too expensive. Rosie clocked all that before she noticed the limp, the scowl, and the unmistakable aura of someone who thought the world owed him something. "Something wrong?" she asked, already wiping her hands on a rag. "Car's overheating," he said curtly. His voice was deep, smooth, too polished for the desert grit. Rosie lifted a brow. "I can see that. Pop the hood." He hesitated, as if used to being told what to do. But he did it, moving awkwardly on the crutches. Rosie leaned over the engine, grimacing. "You've been running this too hard. Coolant bone dry. You're lucky you didn't cook the whole thing." "I didn't exactly have a choice," he muttered. She gave him a quick look. Sweat gleamed on his temples, and beneath the sunglasses she caught the faintest twitch of discomfort, more than just from the heat. "Where you headed?" she asked. "Nowhere fast, apparently." The sarcasm slid off her like water on wax. "I'll need a few hours. You can wait in the office, or there's a diner down the street." He shifted on the crutches, jaw tight. "I'll stay." Rosie shrugged. "Suit yourself." By evening, she had the radiator flushed and refilled, hoses patched, and the car running smooth again. She wiped her hands and found him leaning against the wall of the garage, crutches propped beside him, watching her with an expression that was equal parts frustration and curiosity. "You're good at that," he said. "I should be," Rosie replied. "Been fixing cars since I could walk. Your bill's on the counter." He smirked faintly. "Not even going to ask my name?" She looked him dead in the eye. "Doesn't matter to me." That seemed to throw him off. For the first time all day, he laughed, a short, startled sound. "Guess I deserve that." "You deserve whatever your driving got you into," Rosie said, jerking her chin at his crutches. His face shuddered again. "Yeah, guess I do." She didn't pry. Didn't need to. Everyone who wandered into her garage carried their own ghosts, and she wasn't in the business of chasing them. But later, when he finally introduced himself, Ty, something in her chest shifted, though she couldn't say why. It wasn't until she turned on the radio that night, hearing a commentator talk about the tragic accident of Ty Maddox, the racing world's golden boy, that she realized exactly who was sitting in her town. And the funny part was, she still didn't care. Ty Maddox was used to being recognized. It usually happened before he even said a word. Someone would see his face, his name, or the flash of his sponsor's logo, and their eyes would light up like slot machines. But Rosie didn't look twice. Even after she heard his name, her expression hadn't changed. No awe, no fangirl glow, no desperate rush for an autograph. Just a calm nod as she slid the bill across the counter. "You want to take it easy for a while," she said. "If you plan on tearing up the highway again tomorrow, you'll be right back here." "Not much chance of that," Ty muttered, glancing at the crutches leaning by the door. Rosie gave him a look, not pity, but sharpness that made him straighten instinctively. "Guess not. Try the diner if you're hungry. Tell Luann I sent you. She'll give you an extra slice of pie." He almost laughed. "You handing out coupons now?" "I'm handing out advice," Rosie said. "Don't waste it." The diner smelled of coffee and cinnamon, a welcome break from the gasoline tang of the garage. Ty slid into a booth and stretched out his sore leg. The waitress, Luann, round-faced and warm-eyed, perked up when Rosie's name came up. "You met Rosie, huh? Don't let her fool you. Tough as nails, that one, but she's got a good heart." My, she's definitely tough." "She fix you up already?" "Car's running smooth," he admitted. "That's Rosie. Best mechanic in 3 counties, even if she won't say it. Luann poured his coffee and leaned in conspiratorially. Don't go trying to charm her, though. She's not impressed by big talk or big wallets. Ty raised his brow. Who says I was trying? Luann grinned knowingly. Sweetheart, I've been serving pie longer than you've been driving cars. I can tell when someone's looking twice. Ty let the comment slide, though a small part of him bristled at the accuracy. Rosie wasn't like anyone he'd met in the racing circuit. She hadn't flinched at his name, hadn't even softened when she realized who he was. And damn if that didn't make him want her attention all the more. By the next morning, Ty was back at the garage, not because the car was failing again, but because he didn't have much else to do. His leg was healing slowly. The doctors had benched him indefinitely, and the silence of his hotel room gnawed at him worse than the pain. Rosie was under the hood of a dusty pickup when he limped in, her braids swinging as she worked. Back so soon? She asked without looking up. Thought I'd see if you needed a hand. She slid out from under the hood, wiping her forehead with the back of her wrist. With what? You planning to fix cars on crutches? Maybe I can fetch tools. Hold a flashlight. Something. Rosie studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. Fine. Don't get in my way. It wasn't glamorous work. Ty fetched wrenches, kept track of bolts, and balanced awkwardly while Rosie maneuvered through the guts of the truck. But as the hours ticked by, he found himself oddly at peace. You don't talk much, he said finally. I'm working. Most people will be asking me questions by now. About racing, the crash, all of it. Rosie tightened a bolt and gave him a flat look. Why would I waste my breath on things that don't fix engines? Ty blinked, then laughed. A real laugh this time. You're unbelievable. Thanks, Rosie said dryly, reaching for another tool. But when their hands brushed, grease smudging his knuckles, something sparked in the dusty air of the garage. Neither of them said a word, but the silence carried more weight than the desert heat outside. That night, Ty found himself lying awake in his motel bed, the ceiling fan clicking overhead. He should have felt restless, frustrated, angry at the world for taking his career out from under him. Instead, he kept thinking about Rosie, the way she moved so confidently among the machines, the way her voice cut through his defenses without even trying, the grease streak across her cheek she hadn't bothered to wipe away. For the first time in months, the ache in his chest felt less like loss, and more like something he couldn't quite name. By the third day, Rosie started to notice the pattern. Ty showing up at the garage just after she opened, crutches thumping across the concrete floor, that faintly smug smile daring her to send him away. At first she thought it was boredom, the kind of restless energy she'd seen in plenty of drifters passing through town, men who didn't know what to do with themselves when stripped of whatever identity they wore on their sleeves. But Ty didn't just hover. He watched, asked questions, took mental notes in a way that reminded her of a kid studying for a test he hadn't known was coming. Why the socket wrench instead of the adjustable, he asked one afternoon as she worked on a stubborn axle. Because the socket grips better, she replied, jerking her chin toward the tool tray. Pass me the half-inch. He did, without hesitation. You ever think about teaching this stuff? He asked. I do teach, Rosie said. Every day. To engines. Ty chuckled. Not the same thing. Rosie didn't answer. She didn't have the energy to explain that machines were easier than people. Machines had rules. Logic. People wanted more than she was willing to give. By the weekend, Ty's car was still parked out front. Not broken anymore, just there. Rosie had begun to suspect he was staying in town longer than necessary. You planning on leaving anytime soon? She asked, leaning against the workbench. Ty tilted his head, lips quirking. You trying to get rid of me? Not exactly, she said, but I don't run a daycare. Good thing, he replied, tapping one of his crutches against the floor. I'd be a terrible kid. Rosie snorted, despite herself. You're not wrong. It was the first time he saw her smile, and it hit him harder than the crash ever had. That evening, Rosie closed up shop late. The desert sky was streaked with orange and purple, the cicadas loud in the still heat. Ty was waiting, sitting on the hood of his car with his legs stretched out stiffly. You don't quit, do you? She asked, locking the garage doors. Not when something's worth sticking around for. Rosie's eyes narrowed. Is that your line? The one you use on the girls who fall over themselves when they recognize you. Ty grinned, slow and unapologetic. It usually works. Well, it doesn't work here, Rosie said, brushing past him. Good night, Ty. But she heard his laugh behind her, low and warm, and against her better judgment, the sound lingered in her chest all the way home. The next day, Rosie found him fiddling with a rusted-out carburetor she'd left on a bench. You're going to break that, she warned. Not if you teach me, Ty countered. Something in his tone, half serious, half challenging, made her pause. Then she tossed him a rag. Fine. Wipe your hands. If you're going to work in my garage, you do it right. Ty grinned like a kid handed a trophy. Teaching him should have been frustrating. He was clumsy with tools, impatient with the delicate work, and more prone to cracking jokes than paying attention. But he listened, really listened. And when he finally managed to reassemble the carburetor without her help, his grin was so genuine, Rosie almost forgot to scold him for using too much grease. Not bad, she admitted. Ty wiped sweat from his brow. Careful, Rosie. That almost sounded like a compliment. Don't get used to it. Their eyes met, and for a moment the garage was quiet, the air thick with something Rosie refused to name. She broke it by reaching for another tool, her hands steadier than her heartbeat. That night, Rosie dreamed of engines roaring. Not the flat growl of the truck she usually worked on, but the high, hungry scream of race cars. She woke with her chest tight, her sheets damp with sweat, and the image of Ty's crooked grin burned into her mind. She told herself it was nothing, just a man passing through, filling the silence of her days with a little chaos. He'd leave soon enough. That's what they all did. But when she opened the garage the next morning and saw him already there, wiping down the workbench as if he owned the place, Rosie realized something dangerous. She didn't want him to leave. Chapter 2, Grease and Ghosts. The first dust storm rolled in without warning. One moment the desert sky was its usual pale blue, the horizon sharp against the ridges. The next, a wall of orange-brown grit devoured the town, wind howling like something alive. Rosie had just reached for the garage door when it slammed back against her with the force of the gale. Get away from that, Ty shouted, hobbling forward on his crutches. I know what I'm doing, Rosie snapped, but she let him yank her back from the entrance. Dust hissed in under the crack, fine as powder, settling on the concrete floor. When the door finally shut tight, the world outside disappeared. They were trapped in a cocoon of noise, the storm battering metal walls, rattling tools, groaning through every seam. Great, Rosie muttered. Power'll probably go out next. Sure enough, the lights flickered, then died. The garage sank into twilight, faint orange bleeding through the grimy windows. Ty leaned against the workbench, breathing hard from the effort. You ever get used to this? Rosie grabbed a flashlight, clicking it on. You don't get used to it. You endure it. That seems to be your specialty, Ty said, watching her in the beam of light. Her braid was loose from the wind, grease smudged along her cheekbone, eyes sharp even in the dimness. Rosie ignored the comment, but her pulse quickened anyway. With nothing else to do, they sat on overturned crates, the storm howling around them. Rosie cleaned her tools by habit. Ty fidgeted, tapping one crutch against the floor. Finally, he broke the silence. So, how'd you end up here? Born here, Rosie said simply. And you stayed. Someone had to keep the garage running after my dad passed. This town chews up cars like candy. Ty studied her profile. You ever think about leaving? Rosie shrugged. Engines don't care where you fix them. They just need hands steady enough to do it right. There was a quiet pride in her words, the kind that made Ty ache. She wasn't chasing fame or glory. She was grounded, steady, everything he wasn't. You're lucky, he said softly. She glanced at him, brows furrowing. Lucky. You've got roots. A place that needs you. I spent my whole life running tracks at 200 miles an hour, and the second I break, they replace me with the next kid in line. The bitterness in his tone surprised even him. Rosie didn't offer pity. She simply asked, and do you miss it? Ty let out a breath. Every damn second. The storm screamed louder, drowning the silence that followed. Later, when the wind finally began to ease, Ty reached for the radio Rosie kept on the bench. Static hissed, then a faint tune came through. Some old country song, soft and slow. Rosie raised a brow. You don't seem like the type. I'm not, Ty admitted, but it beats listening to the walls rattle. He shifted, hesitated, then extended a hand. Dance with me. Rosie stared at him like he'd suggested rebuilding an engine blindfolded. In here, covered in grease. Why not? Ty's grin was reckless, daring. You afraid? That did it. Rosie stood, wiping her palms on her overalls, and took his hand. It was clumsy at first. Ty's crutches clattered against the floor until he leaned them aside, balancing carefully with his good leg. Rosie steadied him, their hands greasy, their laughter awkward and real. The song wound around them, sweet and rough, as they swayed between tool benches and oil stains. For the first time since his crash, Ty forgot about the ache in his body, the career slipping through his fingers. All he could feel was Rosie, warm, steady, smelling faintly of gasoline and roses she'd never admit to planting by the garage door. And for Rosie, she forgot about the walls she'd built, the rules she lived by. For one fragile moment, she just let herself be held. When the storm finally passed and silence settled heavy around them, they didn't step apart right away. Rosie cleared her throat, pulling back first. Storm's done. You should head out. Ty's smile lingered, softer now. Sure, but admit it, you enjoyed that. Rosie grabbed the flashlight, turning away to hide the heat in her cheeks. Don't push your luck, Maddox. But she couldn't stop the smallest smile from tugging at her lips as she reopened the garage doors to the washed-clean desert air. The morning after the dust storm, Ty showed up at the garage earlier than usual. He leaned on his crutches at the doorframe, watching Rosie wrestle with an engine block suspended from the hoist. You're going to hurt yourself doing that alone, he said. Rosie didn't look up. Been doing it alone for years. Ty crossed the floor, wincing at each step. Maybe it's time someone gave you a hand. Rosie glanced at him, skepticism plain on her face. With your busted leg? With my hands, he countered. They still work last I checked. Rosie studied him for a moment, then jerked her chin toward the tool bench. Fine. Grab the torque wrench. Let's see if you're more than dead weight. The lesson began simple. Changing oil, replacing a filter, reattaching hoses. Ty was eager but clumsy, his fingers more used to gripping a steering wheel than delicate bolts. You're stripping it, Rosie warned, leaning over his shoulder. I'm not. The bolt squealed, metal protesting. Rosie sighed, taking the wrench from him. You gotta feel it, not force it. She twisted with a steady, sure motion, and the bolt loosened cleanly. Ty muttered, You make it look easy. It is, once you respect it. She handed the wrench back. Try again. Hours passed like that. Ty fumbling, Rosie correcting, their banter sharp and constant. Don't tell me you drive 200 miles an hour, but can't handle a socket set. At least when I crash a car, it's impressive. Rosie smirked, shaking her head. You're hopeless. But when he finally managed to replace a spark plug without her stepping in, Rosie gave him a small nod. Not bad. The praise warmed him more than any trophy ever had. Days slipped into a rhythm. Ty arrived each morning, crutches thumping across the floor. Rosie assigned him small jobs, sorting parts, changing tires, learning the language of machines. He complained, he joked, he dropped tools, but he kept showing up. And Rosie, against her better judgment, started to enjoy it. One afternoon, she caught him humming while he worked, grease streaked across his jaw. You know you look ridiculous, right? She teased. Godin, finally starting to look like one of your people. My people? Yeah, grease monkeys. Rosie rolled her eyes, but her lips twitched. You're not there yet. Give me a week. Try a lifetime, she shot back. Their laughter echoed in the garage, light and unguarded. It was near closing time one evening when Ty lingered by the workbench, staring at his reflection in a chrome hubcap. You know, he said slowly, I haven't touched a car this much since I was 16. Rosie raised a brow. You were a driver, weren't you? Yeah, but before that, before sponsors, before pit crews, I was just a kid in my dad's garage, trying to figure out how engines breathed. He tapped the hubcap. Being here, it almost feels like going back. Rosie leaned against the hoist, arms crossed. And what's so bad about that? Ty looked at her, something raw flickering in his eyes. Because back then, I still thought I was invincible. Rosie didn't reply. She didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. The next day, she decided to push him harder. You want to learn? Fine. You're rebuilding this carburetor. She dropped the greasy hunk of metal in front of him. Debutting get this thing? It looks like a puzzle from hell. Exactly. Rosie tossed him a rag. Start taking it apart. And don't lose any pieces. He groaned but got to work. Hours later, when he finally pieced it back together, with Rosie only guiding him once, he sat back, grinning like a fool. I did it, he said. You did, Rosie admitted, almost smiling. Don't get cocky. Too late. Ty wiped his hands on his shirt. Bet you're impressed. Rosie smirked. You managed not to break it. That's something. But the way her eyes softened told him she was more impressed than she let on. That night, as Rosie closed the garage, Ty lingered at the doorway. You know, Rosie, he said, when I came here, I thought I'd lost everything. But now, he trailed off, unsure how much to say. Rosie waited, her keys in hand. Now I think maybe I found something better. The weight of his words hung in the air. Rosie swallowed, her chest tight. Don't say things you don't mean, she said softly. I don't, Ty replied. Their eyes locked in the dimming light, and for a moment, the world outside, the desert, the races, the storm, faded away. The weeks slipped by in the rhythm of the garage. Rosie taught, Ty learned. What began as clumsy fumbling turned into steady work. Changing tires, rebuilding carburetors, even diagnosing the stubborn cough of an old pickup. You're not terrible anymore, Rosie admitted one afternoon, handing him a rag. High praise from you. Ty teased, grease streaking his cheek. Their banter became as familiar as the clank of tools, their silences less heavy than before. One evening, another desert storm swept in. The power blinked out, plunging the garage into dusk. Ty fiddled with the radio until a faint tune came through, something slow, warm. Dance with me, he said suddenly. Rosie scoffed. In here? Covered in grease. Exactly. His grin was reckless, boyish. Against her better judgment, she let him pull her close. They swayed awkwardly between the tool benches, his weight leaning into her steadiness. Rosie laughed, surprising herself. Ty's laugh joined hers, low and real. For a moment, the world shrank to the warmth of his hand in hers, the scent of oil and dust, and something sweeter she refused to name. When the song ended, Rosie stepped back first. Don't get ideas, Maddox. But her flushed cheeks betrayed her. Later, as they closed up, Ty lingered at the door. Rosie, I thought losing racing meant losing myself. But maybe there's more to me than that. Rosie's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him not to hope, not to tether himself here. But instead she said quietly, maybe there is. By the end of the second month, Ty's limp had eased. His hands were rougher, his ego softer. And when Rosie caught him staring at a poster of an old stock car taped to her office wall, she saw something flicker in his eyes. You're thinking about it, she said. He nodded slowly. About racing again. About not letting it end like this. Rosie didn't stop him. She only asked, then what are you waiting for? Ty's grin returned, bright, boyish, dangerous. A reason worth racing for. And though Rosie turned away, her chest betrayed her with a wild, traitorous beat. Chapter 3, The Finish Line. Ty left for the city 2 weeks later. Rosie told herself she didn't care. She told herself she'd gotten used to the rhythm of him in her garage, the sound of his laugh echoing off the concrete, the way he made even the dust storms feel like something worth remembering, but that it was only temporary. He had a world waiting for him. She had her engines. That was enough. But when she walked into the garage the morning after he left and found his rags still draped over the workbench, her chest tightened in a way no wrench could fix. Ty threw himself into recovery with a ferocity that surprised even him. Physical therapy, long hours in the gym, endless laps in the simulator. But every time he pushed past the pain, Every time his body screamed to quit, he remembered Rosie's voice. Respect it. Don't force it. He treated his body the way she'd taught him to treat machines, steady, patient, precise. And slowly, piece by piece, he rebuilt himself. By the end of summer, the call came. A sponsor willing to give him one more shot. One race. A chance to prove he wasn't finished. Ty said yes before the man on the phone had finished speaking. Race day dawned hot and bright. The grandstands buzzed with energy, cameras flashing, engines roaring like caged beasts. Ty stood beside his car, helmet under his arm, heart pounding harder than it had in years. The paint gleamed fresh under the sun, red and silver, bold and fast. And across the side, in clean black script, was a single word. Rosie. He hadn't asked permission. He hadn't needed to, because this race wasn't just for him. It was for the woman who reminded him he was more than a machine built to go fast. For the mechanic who'd seen him broken and hadn't turned away. For the only person who'd ever looked at him and seen the man, not the driver. Meanwhile, in a dusty Nevada garage miles away, Rosie nearly dropped a wrench when a radio commentator's voice cut through the static. And making his return after last year's crash, Ty Maddox, driving car number 27, with the name Rosie painted across the side. Rosie froze. Heat flooded her cheeks, her hands trembling despite herself. Idiot, she muttered under her breath. But her chest ached with something fierce and unstoppable. For the first time in years, she locked the garage, climbed into her pickup, and drove toward the sound of engines. At the track, Ty Maddox raced like a man reborn. Every turn was sharper, every acceleration steadier, his focus unshaken. He wasn't just driving to prove himself anymore. He was driving for the woman who'd shown him who he was off the track. And when the checkered flag dropped, Ty crossed the line in first. The roar of the crowd was deafening, but his eyes searched only for one face. Rosie stood at the edge of the pit lane, arms crossed, dust still on her boots from the long drive. She told herself she wouldn't come, but there she was, heart hammering, watching his car roll to a stop, her name painted boldly across the side. When Ty climbed out, helmet in hand, sweat streaking his face, he didn't look at the cameras or the reporters swarming him. He looked only at her. "You came," he said, grinning, breathless from the race. Rosie tried for sarcasm, but her voice broke. "You painted my name on a damn race car, Maddox." Hard to ignore that. He limped forward, closing the distance. "Rosie, I don't want sponsors, trophies, or headlines. I want you. Grease, storms, stubbornness, and all." For a long moment, Rosie just stared at him, her throat tight. Then, finally, she let herself smile. "You're still an idiot," she whispered. And then she pulled him in, grease-stained hands and all, kissing him hard enough to drown out the roar of the crowd. Later, when the noise faded and the cameras moved on, Ty leaned against the car, arm around Rosie's shoulders. She rested her head against him, grease smudged against his racing suit. "Where do we go from here?" he asked softly. Rosie smirked. "Back to the garage. You still owe me for that carburetor you nearly broke." Ty laughed, the sound freer than it had been in months. "Deal." And as the desert sun dipped low on the horizon, Rosie realized something she never thought she'd admit. Sometimes, the right person doesn't just fix what's broken. Sometimes, they make you run better than ever. The end. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.